And now it's time for another edition of What Would Jello Do? Happy birthday, Canada! Well, actually, it was last August, but I had to do this one. Why should I care about Canada's birthday? It's not just any birthday, it's their bicentennial. They weren't as obnoxious about it as we were, and I had to graduate in the bicentennial class, and BUI Centennial was just everywhere, all the time. At least we got the goofy picture of the Shriners that wound up on the cover of Dead Kennedy's Frankenchrist album out of one of all the bicentennial parades and commemorative Pepsi bottles and bunting here and bunting there. Well, who knew that Canadians tied their independence, although when you're still a commonwealth with the Queen hanging in courtrooms, how independent are you really? Tie it to what in America is called the War of 1812. And we are taught in America this was all about the British raiding our ships at sea and forcing our sailors into the British Navy. Eventually they even stormed into Washington and burned the White House, or was it the Black House at the time, down. Well, in Canada they apparently see it differently. I didn't see a lot of hoopla about this when I was in Canada. A lot of people were shrugging their shoulders in spite of the Prime Minister putting $28 million and more into a new monument and a commemorative coin and reenactments and all. But they see the War of 1812 differently, as when America declared war on Canada, which apparently the United States Congress actually did, although they were British colonies or territories at the time. Upper Canada, which became Ontario, and Lower Canada, which was French-speaking and eventually became Quebec. And they may have some grounds for this. Thomas Jefferson did say that annexing Canada would be, quote, a mere matter of marching. And in Canada they seem to have better documentation of American soldiers pillaging and looting and burning startup towns and villages of expatriates of the old American colonies who fled after the Tories lost. They still celebrate being descendants of Tories in one town in New Brunswick every year. It would be interesting to attend that someday. The French fought on the side of the British, the French-speaking Canadians to be anyway, because they were afraid if America stormed in and seized the place, we'd pull an Arizona on them and they'd lose their language and culture just like some other people have. And in the end, sadly, the real losers were what in Canada are called the First Nations people, or Aboriginals. We call them Indians or Native Americans down here, who were hoping that maybe they could carve out a homeland for everybody else would leave them alone. The Shawnee got nailed in this. Tecumseh died in battle, of course. And this also brings to mind how differently people, even supposed allies like America and Canada, see history so differently just depending on how it's written or bent. You know, corporate propaganda McNews goes a long, long way back. And who was it? Was it Sartre who first said those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it? Yeah. So I thought of this when back in 7th grade there was a long unit on Soviets, communist propaganda techniques, how they rewrote history books instead of Russian, even invented the light bulb. How preposterous. Then I get to 8th grade and hey, wait a minute, the same propaganda techniques are in the American history books too. Columbus discovered America, and oh, we wanted freedom from those evil taxes, thus indoctrinating us again against the idea that taxes are not such a bad thing when they help the community and the public at large and maintain the roads and the schools and things like that. They don't mention that maybe it was like greedy, wealthy landowners and pot growers and all who didn't want to give up their slaves, and King George III didn't want that going on anymore. That's another theory behind the American Revolution you don't hear much about. You know, snipping away different interpretations of history and slanting them different ways are one more way of churning out stupid, obedient people down the line. You know, another exhibit would be how little Japanese school kids are educated about what their ancestors did to the Chinese and the Koreans in the first half of the 20th century. There's still battles going on about that. So in the meantime, happy birthday to Canada. May you handle your second 200 years better than we have so far. But isn't it a little preposterous to think that Americans were that hell-bent on seizing Canada? Well, we did do the same thing to Mexico 3 decades later, didn't we?